Uncommon Traveler, Mary Kingsley in Africa, written and illustrated by Don Brown. In 1870, a small house stood on a lonely lane outside London, England. Bricks filled nearly all of the front windows. Shutters blocked the back windows. Vines choked the back wall. Gloom ruled the rooms. 8-year-old Mary Kingsley lived there. It was as if she lived alone. Her father, George, traveled the world seeking adventure. Her mother, also named Mary, was sickly and rarely left her bed. Her younger brother, Charles, was away at school. Mary didn't go to school and would never go to school. The whole of my childhood and youth was spent at home in the house and garden, she later said. The living world, outside world I saw little of. I felt out of place at the few parties I ever had the chance of going to, for I knew nothing of play in such things. Still, Mary was happy. I had a great amusing world of my own, the books in Father's library. Novels and poetry books, science and history books, travel and adventure books. Books were her companions and teachers. But there was a life beyond the library, and Mary was a dutiful daughter. She nursed her mother, she tidied the house, she helped her father during his few visits. George Kingsley wrote about his travels, and Mary happily uncovered facts he needed from her beloved library. She knew to be quiet and make little fuss, or risk George's temper and have a book thrown at her. She was the family's handyman, too. Mary taught herself home repair by reading English Mechanic magazine. Once a leaky pipe needed mending. Standing on a box beneath it, I cut the lead pipe gallantly through, Mary recalled, but Mary forgot to turn off the water. Swoosh! Came out like a jet of water that knocked me over, box and all. She had other repairs, other odd jobs, other chores to do. Mary's narrow life as a handyman, nursemaid, servant, and aide went on for days, for weeks, for years. Childhood ended. Youth disappeared. In 1892, her mother and father died. For the first time in her life, good daughter Mary Kingsley was free of her duties. She was 30 years old. Her world, once cramped and dark, was now as big as the globe. The idea of it made her head spin. Inspired by her father's journeys and the travel books she loved, Mary had the remarkable notion of going to West Africa. People thought Mary was foolish. Much of West Africa was a mystery, even to those who lived there. Visitors risked disease, wild animal attacks, and the hostility of some Africans. West Africa was not a place for a single woman to visit. Mary ignored the warnings and planned her trip. She would travel light, without a tent, eating native food and wearing her regular English clothes. She would trudge, wade, clamber, and climb in a high-necked, long-sleeved shirt, long, heavy skirt, and proper Victorian boots. She arrived in West Africa in 1893. Mary was delighted. Oh, the grand and vivid sights, sounds, and smells she met. She ignored the scorching heat and the soggy air, and the odd insects. One looked like a flying lobster. Another, an enormous beetle, flopped into a soup plate and then shook itself dry like a retriever. That's a dog. She collected insects and freshwater fish, which she later donated to the British Museum of Natural History. That would make me feel very sick to my stomach if a bug went into my food. What about you guys? All right, let's keep going with the story. Of course, Mary encountered creatures bigger than fish and insects. When Mary explored a riverbank, a hippo blocked her way. I scratched him behind the ear with my umbrella and we parted on good terms, she said. Look at that hippopotamus. She's saying that she scratched him behind the ear. Does anyone know if hippos are actually nice animals or not? I'm going to give you a clue. They're probably not nice animals, actually. So she was very brave to try to scratch it behind the ear. Let's keep going with the story. In a swamp, an 8 foot long crocodile chose to set his front paws over the stern of my canoe, said Mary. I had to retire to the bow to keep the balance and fetch him a clip on the snout with a paddle. This was only a pushing young creature who had not learnt manners. So she is saying that the crocodile climbed onto her canoe because he didn't have manners, not because he wanted to try to eat her. Sounds like a brave woman. Unfazed by the wild beasts, rough country, and terrific heat, Mary pushed farther inland and met the people who dwelled there. Once, a trek up a steep hill provided a surprise meeting with some of them. I slipped, slid, and finally fell plump through the roof of an unprotected hut, Mary recalled. A great hubbub followed, and she paid for the damage she had done. Mary met members of the Ajumba, Igalwa, and the Pungwe tribes, but she felt a special closeness to the Fang people. She admired them greatly. The Fang is full of fire, temper, intelligence, and go, she said. Filled with fire, temper, intelligence, and go herself, Mary was drawn deeper into West Africa. A paddle wheeler carried Mary more than 100 miles up the Ogowe River. There she gathered guides and boarded a canoe. The river was treacherous. She and her guides often crashed into boulders or spun wildly in whirlpools and had to leap for their lives. Mary then plunged into the uncharted forest toward the Rembue River. I was a wild trek. The forest canopy hid the sky. Thick vines roped the trees. Great blossoms dotted the forest floor in glorious cups of orange and crimson and pure white. Mary and her guide struggled over a hill covered with broken trees felled by a great storm. The hot, wet air blanketed them like a great weight. Elephants, gorillas, and velvety-skinned snakes crossed their path. They stopped for the night at Fang village. Mosquitoes and lice kept Mary awake. Restless, she borrowed a canoe and slid into the nearby lake. All was purple-black. Only the stars and glowworms twinkled. Silver-white fish sprang from the water, reminding Mary of flashing swords. She paddled to a far bank, stepped onto the shore, and discovered she wasn't alone. I felt the earth quiver under my feet and heard a soft, big sogging sound, and looking around, saw I had dropped in on a hippo banquet, she said. I made out 5 of the immense brutes around me, so I softly returned to the canoe and shoved off. She bathed in the lake, returned to the camp just before dawn, and continued on. Once she stumbled into a spike-filled pit used to trap animals and narrowly escaped harm. It is at these times that you realize the blessings of a good thick skirt, she observed. A slippery log bridged a ravine. Mary walked it like a tightrope. Mary and her group plodded through the sun-soaked swamps of an ink-black slime. The stench was awful. Flies pestered them. Sometimes they sank up to their necks in the filthy water. They finally emerged from the swamps and reached the mud banks of the Rembue River, to the great surprise of nearby villagers. A noisy crowd soon surrounded them. Mary's journey up the Ogowe River and across the forest to the Rembue River was a great feat, but she didn't crow. She called it a mere picnic. Picnic or not, West Africa tugged at Mary. If I have a heaven, she said, this will be mine. Mary returned to England, where she wrote about Africa and talked about Africa. Thousands of people read her books and listened to her lectures. They were astonished that a woman had experienced such adventures. She found fame for which she didn't care a hairpin. She still had a few friends and felt out of place at parties. Mary filled her apartment with African masks and charms, baskets and sculptures. She kept the rooms hot and humid to remind her of Africa, to remind her of home. All right, so that was our story about Mary's travels to Africa. So with a grown-up, I want you to answer a couple questions for me. You can just discuss them. You don't have to write this part down. But I want you to think about 1. Why did she pick going to Africa for her big trip? She finally didn't have to take care of people anymore and she got a chance to go on a vacation of sorts, and she picked Africa. So why do you think she did that? Number two, um, what was Africa like? Tell a grown up. What things did she see? What were the challenges that she experienced? What parts did she love and why? And the last question I want you to think about was, did it seem like Mary felt scared, or did she feel happy and excited by the adventure? So, last week on Thursday and Friday, we started talking about places that you would like to go and your own adventure. Where would you like to go? Why do you want to go there? What would it be like? So today I'd like you to work on writing a story. For Trey, I would like you to use words and write it out for me. Have a grown-up take a picture of your story and send it to me. You're going to write a story about an adventure that you would like to go on. You need to make sure you tell me where it is, who will be going, what adventures they might experience, and if they learn anything on their trip. For Jesse, I want you to draw me a comic book of sorts of the story that you want to tell. So you're going to draw me at least 5 pictures, the same stuff for like I asked Trey to do. So I want you to draw a picture of where and when, draw a picture of who, and draw a picture of a couple of the adventures you might go on, and if you're going to learn anything on your adventure or your trip. So that should be 5 pictures. And again, have a grown-up take a picture for me and send it to me. All right? So that is your shared reading work for today. I hope you enjoyed that story, and I hopefully will see you all tomorrow.